If I could have 5 minutes of your time, I'd like to show you how I designed the summer heat mechanic for Robbit, my Godot 4 puzzle game. Starting from the top, heat is the mechanic I decided on for the summer levels. Each vegetable will have a heat meter around it that shows what the current heat value is at, and if that value ever maxes out, the level is lost. Don't want your produce spoiling. Once I decided on this, puzzle requirements were of course the next thing I wanted to focus on. I wanted to make some kind of prop that shades the vegetable and lets the player store it while moving another one, so that went on the design list. I also needed to make it so the vegetable would decrease heat when undo is called and fully reset when the level resets. I'm still contemplating whether or not to keep the undo mechanic rather than just having a level reset button, so feedback is welcome. Finally, the last feature I wanted to make would help with player clarity. Hovering over tomato with the cursor will reveal a count of the turns remaining before an overheat. With that, let's jump into the heat meter. The heat meter begins with an array of these sprites that have 5 frames they can move through, representing the heat of the vegetable. In order to keep the heat level working with 10 meter pieces at all times, I set an increment equal to 10 divided by the vegetable's heat tolerance. As the heat increases by this increment, if the value stored in current heat is greater than the index value of a meter piece, I increment that frame by 1. I'm keeping track of these frame values for the meter in a separate array, which lets me go negative with the values, something that's quite important as you'll see in minute 4. Let's see this in practice now. This level has one tomato with a heat value of 5, one with a value of 15, and one with a value of 24. As you can see, each of the meters is filling at their own speeds and tracking the current heat of the vegetable. Currently, if max heat is reached, the player's input is disabled. When finished fully, a prompt to restart the level will pop up. The current solution is more of a placeholder. Moving on, time to talk about the shade prop. The shade source is fairly simple code-wise, so I want to focus mostly on visuals and purpose. I decided on a bit of a lattice/scaffolding for the actual design, though this may change in the future. Using Asprite's alpha channels to change the opacity of the color, I added a shadow beneath it to make it clear to the player that that's what it does. Both the player and the vegetable can move beneath it, so it's important to show visually that the vegetable is shaded. The reason I added this feature overall is to make puzzle design more flexible and add more options to present the player with when solving. I've already got quite a few puzzles shaped out now using this feature, and many more ideas that I'm still tossing around in the editor. The actual functioning of the shade in Godot is very simple. I made the tomatoes all share a class tomato that can be checked when a body enters or exits the collision, setting a variable named shaded to true or false respectively. This variable can then be accessed all over the code, whether it be global variables or the tomatoes themselves, to check if the vegetable is shaded and pause the progress of the heat meter if it is. Speaking of global variables, one of the trickiest things I had to figure out was to make the heat meter work with the undo system. It started fairly easy. I just reversed the direction of the increments that it receives and had heat going backwards pretty fast. The only issue was with the meter visuals themselves. If I kept it as it originally was, each piece of the meter would go back a frame even if they weren't supposed to, meaning the meter would be empty of heat visually far before it was actually empty. The solution, as I mentioned earlier, was to allow the meter values to go negative, making it so undoing an action would only change frames in perfect reverse of how they changed in the first place. With that, I ended up separating the heat update code into a separate function so I can access it in the tomato if need be. When resetting the level, the code is trivial in comparison. The only thing I have to do is reset the current heat. Currently, as I said in minute 1, I'm debating removing the undo function. I think it detracts from the difficulty of a puzzle if you can easily undo every mistake that you make. Finally, I'll showcase a feature I've just begun working on to improve player clarity. When the mouse is hovered over top of a tomato, a label appears that displays the turns remaining before the tomato spoils. It's just a basic font for the moment, but I think this feature will be a great one to have, especially if I end up cutting the undo mechanic. The code is very simple, as I just have a mouse entered and mouse exited function that toggle visibility and change text on the tomato. The turn number is tracked by a variable named turns remaining, which is actually the primary check for whether or not the player has lost. When it hits -1, the tomato has overheated and you're out of luck. I'm keeping this tomato exclusive since it's the only vegetable in the summer levels, and I'll probably have some kind of animation around the tomato so the player can tell easier when they have one hovered or selected. In addition, I plan on adding a custom cursor design that fits better with the pixel art of the game. This has been 5 minutes of game development, and I will see you all in the next one for 5 more.